Fun to record. Our first speaker is Juan Carrillo. He is a retired deputy director of the California Arts Council and faculty member of Casunas River College. He is a historian, writer, poet, and visual artist. He was born in Mexico, raised in San Francisco, and has lived in Sacramento for over 50 years. His drawings, prints, and paintings have been exhibited in various galleries and exhibition spaces in solo and group shows with the Royal Chicano Air Force. Our second speaker is Juanishi Orosco, who was born and raised in Sacramento. He attended California State University, Sacramento, and in 1969, alongside similarly minded artists like Jose Montoya and Esteban Villa, started the Royal Chicano Air Force. Orozco is an arts educator providing outreach and training to hundreds of young artists throughout Northern California. He is known for his vivid prints and murals depicting his Mexican, Chicano, and indigenous cultural roots, which can be found across California, as well as nationally in repositories like the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Please give a warm welcome to both our speakers, and I pass it off first to our first speaker, Juan Carrillo, who will talk about his own work, and then he will talk with Juanishi Orozco about his work.
Well, thank you, Devorah, and thanks to all of you who are part of this wonderful library. It came as a surprise to me that our work was here in the State Library. And I'm so pleased because I know it'll be taken care of. And in the way that we've been taken care of, I have to thank Sue Tyson and Devorah, who you just heard, and Elena Smith, who may appear at some moment. But the three of them have done everything to welcome us, to provide for our needs, to make everything ready for today's presentation. It's hardly a conversation, but and to I haven't met Jessie Knox Jensen, but I can assure her that her team is really tops. So I thank all of you for being so gracious and kind to us. In preparing my thoughts about today, I went across my life. Most of my life has been spent with the Royal Chicano Air Force as compañeros, as compadres and comadres, and they've just been a part of my life. And so when you get 30 minutes to talk about not only that experience, but all the leading up steps and the work that came out, and then your own work on top of that, you think, how am I going to do it? But I'm going to give it a try. And I got my timer, so I'll keep to the time that's been allotted to me. Let me just start out by saying that art has been part of my life. I didn't call it art when I was in the 4th or 5th grade, but I did what so many artists did when they're young people. They're influenced by magazines, cartoons. Mine, big influence was Mad Magazine, and some of you may remember Mad Magazine, but the illustrations, the drawings were wonderful, and I took off drawing. And I have been drawing until what's every day of my life. I try to keep a pen handy and a drawing book, and if I'm sitting having coffee, I've got to draw somebody in the cafe or in the restaurant or in the bar or in the park. I've always drawn. I've never been a painter. Certainly I was not a silk screener, a printer, but my interest in art was a part of me. When I was married and early in my early 20s, I was maybe 21, something like that. USF, University of San Francisco, offered a couple of nights of night classes on Mexican architecture, the Gothic and Baroque period of Mexico. At that point, I knew very little about Mexico, very little about my heritage. I didn't speak Spanish. I grew up speaking English. And being a Catholic kid in a Catholic school, the one thing that happened is the Irish, the Italian, the African Americans, the Germans and Mexicans, all that seemed to be left behind, and what we were Catholic kids. And so I grew up with very little of Mexico and my heritage in me. Certainly in my home, it was present. My family, the larger extended family, it was there when we all gathered. But I grew up without art training, and I grew up with very little knowledge of Mexican culture. I've always been interested in the art and folk art of Mexico and Latin America. So I'm going to just jump to college because I think that introduced me to the life I've had as part of the Royal Chicano Air Force. I went to City College, San Francisco. I didn't know what I was going to go to college for. I didn't know what my life would be like in the future. I went from engineering, I went to accounting, I went into labor, union kind of thinking maybe I'd get involved in unions. I bounced around. I made it through City College and I transferred to UC Berkeley in 1966. And there, life changed. As a student, I ended up joining a group of other college students. We started an organization called Quinto Sol, the first Chicano student organization in UC in 100 years, in the 100 years of its history. The group then began to publish. We thought that our best work would be to publish a journal, and we published El Grito, a journal of contemporary Mexican-American thought. And within it was art and poetry, short stories, and we all had jobs to do. We had to read the work, we had to solicit work, and it turned out that the following year I was soliciting work from Jose Montoya and Esteban Villa, one by phone and one I went to his home to pick up his art, and we published their work in El Grito. So I met Jose eventually in the Bay Area, and I met Esteban when I went to pick up his work. And as the time went on at Berkeley, the rise of I'll call it the Chicano art movement began. The real roots of the Chicano art movement for me was there. It was happening in Los Angeles, it was happening in Albuquerque, it's happening in Texas, in Colorado. It was happening everywhere where we were there in some significant number. We began to somehow, in a strange sort of way, it's historical, and sometimes we don't know how history really begins and how it captures people, but it did. And the Chicano movement, political and artistic, started for me in the Bay Area. And so I got to know Jose and Esteban a little bit more, and I met many, many artists. And so art became, again, a real important part of my education and my political activity. And it ended fighting for the ethnic studies. And when I finally left Berkeley, I now had a teaching credential, and I transferred to CSU, Cal State University, Sacramento. And I applied for and was accepted into a master's program in a project called the Mexican American Education Project. 20 school teachers and administrators went through a year of education. We would get a master's degree at the end and would be better prepared to deal with issues of culture, issues of history, issues of sociology within the campuses and within the system that we all worked in. And lo and behold, my fellow student in 1969 was Jose Montoya. So Jose and I now we're very close. We spent every day together. A fascinating individual for sure. I wondered how the hell did this man come to be, because he knew so much. And it was just great fun to sit with him and talk with him. And within the school year, the project hired Esteban Villa. Now it's Esteban and Jose together. And I'm going through that school year with all the others. We had a 6-week trip to Mexico to study education in Mexico. And slowly, with Jose on the campus and Esteban on the campus, these young artists began to be attracted to them, or they recruited them. And slowly this circle of artists began to grow and grow and grow. And so I begin my story with some images here. I want to share with you the very first image. For me, the Royal Chicano Air Force was seen more like this. Instead of a small group of artists, 10, 12 artists, we were a wide circle of Chicano students, Chicano faculty, teachers from other places, people who worked for the city, the county, the state, people who worked in nonprofits, if I hadn't said that, people who worked in kitchens, people who worked in other kinds of jobs. But it also included singers, musicians, dancers, poets. And without this group that you're seeing here, and it was larger than this. I mean, there are many people who did not get in this photo on that day. The group grew, and all the things that the RCAF gets attributed as being, that we did it. The truth of the matter is we was a much larger circle than a group of visual artists. And I just want to acknowledge that as we begin, because I want those of you who are listening, watching, to keep in mind that the influence of the RCAF, of the circle, of the, what's the word when there's no leader, you're just a group, it'll come to me. So I'm sorry about that. But so here we are at Sac State, here we are in Sacramento, and we come with backgrounds in art, we come with backgrounds in political work, and throughout California, in communities everywhere, there are students and there are people who are beginning to coalesce and move to better the lives of Mexicans in the United States, happening everywhere. So it was pretty heady times. And the artists section began to incorporate service to the community as their main mission. Their core reason for being was to better the lives through education and through promotion of community activities. It's spreading the word was really important to us. And so we began to do very early prints, posters. It just was one way of communicating when you had no other resources. You just needed the labor, the ink, the paper, and thank God for many people, they had the knowledge on silk screening. And so maybe I should begin and show you the first of my work that came out of this. This is a 1975 photo. So we, during the time of making posters, a lot of the posters we made, a lot of the printing was made to support the United Farm Workers. So a lot of the early posters had references to the struggle of the farm workers. The guys often, through silkscreen, created flags, red cloth and black eagle, and some lettering perhaps. And those were made for the workers who were coming to Sacramento to come to the Capitol to lobby for, the policies of better pay and better working conditions and other kinds of things like voting for a union. So that's a lot of the work that was going on, and announcements about events and all of that. But we also did calendarios. This is an image for the Calendario Chicano for the 1978 calendar. So of course it was done in 77. By 1978, as this says, 77 when I made this, I was already well into studying my heritage because I was a graduate with a degree in American history at Berkeley. I was interested in history. For me, I taught history at the college that hired me in 1970, Cosumnes River College. I taught introduction to Chicano studies, US history, Mexican history, and Minorities in America. That was my coursework. And so the study of Mexican history and Mexican American history led to the study of my family and its history. And so I started out with this photo on the right of my grandmother and my mother, taken in about 1917 in Sinaloa, in San Ignacio, Sinaloa. Both lived in a rancho outside of the town, beautiful little town. But I had that image. I had lots of I had gone to Mexico as a college student to get to know Mexico. I spent 10 weeks traveling around in my car, my van at a time with my family, camping out, going to small villages, to ranchos, to cities, all over Mexico. And so I had images of Mexico in my head. And of course, I had images of just my own family with that I used here, the crucifix or the cross, the holy statues, the little pictures of family in your home. I just brought that into it. Then there's the rural nature of on my roots and of California. That was such a big part of all of us in the RCAF. And so I created this, and I was able to get April, May, June as my responsibility, because April included my mother's birthday. You see it there. There's a heart around 7th of April. And you'll also see the 15th marked up, and that's my brother's birthday. And you see June 18th marked up, that was my sister's birthday. So I was really pleased to do this. I certainly had a lot of help. The rest of the RCAF knew what they were doing, and they helped me to do this. Next. Oh, I might point out also that Louis the Foot, Juanishi, Orosco, and Jose Montoya had responsible for the other 3 quarters of this calendario. As I said, I love drawing. And when I saw this in a book, we were, as the staff, the faculty member of MECHA, the Chicano student organization at Casunas River College, we did things to promote our heritage. We celebrated holidays. We had a club. I mean, the MECHA was our Chicano student club on campus. And so we did a lot of things. But one of the things we did was we threw a dance in I think it was 75 on campus. And so I remembered this drawing. I went back and I pulled this drawing out, a drawing by Miguel Covarrubias from Mexico, very famous artist, illustrator. He was a lot of caricatures that he would draw. He studied not only all of Mexico or parts of Mexico, but he studied the folk arts. He did a book on Bali. He lived in New York. He did work for the New Yorker, and traveled all over the world. Married to a modern dancer. So I lifted this and I used it for our poster. Next. And this is what it looked like after the design and after the execution of the work. I'm a romantic at heart, and you see here this image, a very romantic setting for the danzón, the dance of Veracruz and Cuba. The music also is called danzón music. But of course, for us, it was salsa night. And so you see the 3 bands, 2 from the Bay Area, and our very own RCAF band, Freddie Rodriguez y La Familia. And so this is 1975. In 1970, when you see Viva America Libre, long live a free America, meaning the Americas. And so I put that on. And again, because of the politics, 2 years earlier, there was a military coup in Chile. And the military ran the country and had been running the country 2 years when this was made, and went on for a very long time. And, and the response, of course, was the battle with the dictatorship. And there will always be people who will, they'll put their lives on the line to to get out from under dictatorships and the like. The night of the dance, somebody came up to me and said, I thought you were going to be providing food tonight, some chili con carne or something. I said, what? He said, yeah, on the poster it said free chili. Well, the difference between somebody who has a consciousness and someone who doesn't, the role of the educator is very visible when you're talking about Latin America. You just have to sort of pass the knowledge on because people are not getting it on a day-to-day basis. It's just overwhelming, right? The amount of news and information that comes at us. But I thought that was a funny moment. Next. This was done in our second home of the RCAF. We started a nonprofit and called it the Centro de Artistas Chicanos. And we had two very good places, and we went on to a third later in our history. But we left a facility, a very large facility, but it was costly. We ran out of money, I suppose, I don't know. But we got a free facility at a school, Catholic school that closed. It was the Catholic school of Our Lady of Guadalupe Church here in Sacramento. The pastor, Keith Kenny, Father Keith Kenny, was very good friends with Cesar Chavez and a strong supporter of the United Farm Workers. And so between he and a member of the RCAF who went on to become the mayor of Sacramento, Joe Serna, with Joe and his work with the farm workers, with Keith and knowing Keith Kenny, somehow I believe between the two of them, and maybe with Jose, maybe, I don't know the workings of all that, but we ended up with a classroom space, which was the RCAF studio. And there we not only produced work, but we also started a mercado to sort of move forward the art that was being made and a whole variety of things with music and food. And so I made this poster to advertise the upcoming mercado that was happening. In my travels, I had been to the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. And so I was among women in the markets and other places of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. And so this is a very contemporary dress for people from there. But I also had photos in my family, of my family, my mother, who would wear a Tehuana outfit in the photo. I never quite understood why when I was growing up, but it's the huipil, it's called a huipil, it's the blouse and the long skirt. And somewhere I must have seen a woman with, certainly you see people in other parts of the world where they carry baskets on their head. And so that image was stuck with me. So I created this for Mercado de las Flores, a woman wearing a huipil with the United Farm Workers eagle on the cover. And underneath it, if you don't know if you can read it, it says RCAF. And so let's go to the next slide, just so I can show something very quickly, because I'm not going to explain how to use silkscreen. I'm not very good at how to explain it, but you see my original drawing on the left. And on the right, there's something called Rubylith that I learned to work with. And Rubylith, you lay over, every time you want to run one color, you had to create a whole new screen with Rubylith on it. When you cut out, you're cutting out the color that's going to stay. And so you have to run it as many times as colors that you're going to run. So it takes a long time. It's pretty complex. Let's go to the next image. Here you see a close-up of the woman who's featured on this poster. And you can see, hopefully you can read it, on her huipil. You see red written down there. You see in the eagle surrounded by red. You see red on a mountain behind you. And then you see blue below that. So what happens and what you have to do when you're working is you sometimes need a color, but you don't need to go through all that work. You just create color on color and you end up. So if I run the blue over the red, I get the purple. And so yellow with blue, you get green. So on this poster, those techniques were used. And so maybe we should add that next, Devora, there you go. So now you see the work up close of how it all sort of looks as you're laying out color on top of color. And so that's a print that's here in the collection, and very nice that it's here. Next. This is a print that was made for the 15th anniversary of a very important arts center here in Sacramento. It was called La Raza Bookstore to begin with, and eventually became La Raza Galeria Posada as the gallery was added. And so 15 years later, in 1987, the RCAF was commissioned to make a suite of prints. And I had a background in photography. I love photography. I love film. And so I use that knowledge and that love and I've had photographs of every artist up until that time. So I decided in my piece called Imágenes de Ayer, the images of yesterday, to use images like this for the 15th anniversary. Next. And I was pleased to see that La Raza Quinceañero booklet included my images and the images of Irma Lerma Barbosa. So, and this collection is here at the library as well. Next. These are the artists who made the suite. I wanted to, show this photo shoot. Jose Montoya, who had a piece and was absent for this shoot. On the left, and this is what, 1987. So we're talking about from 1970, I'll say 1970. So this is 17 years later after the circle started. Juanishi Orosco on the back, on the left, and I'm standing next to him. Then Louis the Foot, Juan Cervantes, Stan Padilla, Irma Lerma Barbosa, Ricardo Favela, kneeling, Armando Cid, Rudy Cuellar, Esteban Villa, and as I said, Jose Montoya was not there for this. Next. Lastly, this is my last photo. This is from an exhibit opening in 2007. So you went from 1987, 17 years there, whatever, to 2007. This is 20 years later. We're all still there. We were that night for sure. Everyone in the exhibit is in this photo. I wanted to also point out, today is Dia de los Muertos, and many of our circle, I always get tight when I say this, are gone. And so I wanted to pay homage to them tonight. On the left, top, standing, Juan Cervantes, deceased. Ricardo Favela, deceased. Esteban Villa, deceased. Rudy Cuellar, Sam Rios, deceased. Lorraine Garcia Nakata, who lives in San Francisco and works still, producing the work, and the prints, the tall prints behind us is her work. And then there's Armando Cid, deceased. He's standing in front of one of the paintings that he had in the exhibit. On the bottom is Stan Padilla, then Jose Montoya, deceased, myself, and Juanishi Orosco, who I will introduce in a minute. I think I'm introducing him. Maybe we were both introduced at the front end. But anyway, he's next to speak. And so that was a quick run through of 50 years here and 81 years on Earth. So there you have it in 30 minutes. And I hope you learned something about us, my work, So there you are. So I just move right into introducing the work of Juanishi Orosco. My compadre, who I have known since one night when he was teaching me yoga when I didn't know him. That's how we met, in a yoga class. One of the best yoga classes I've ever taken, I might add. Thank you, compadre, for that experience. And we're still here. So the very first piece is a piece called Madre Santa, 1987 piece. And this was made for the quinceañera, the 15th anniversary of La Raza Galeria Posada as well. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to ask you a question or two, possibly, Juanishi. And maybe you want to say some opening statement. I've got to add to the listeners that I really appreciate Juanishi being here and taking the time and the effort to be here. And Juanishi knows I'm going to say this, so I'm not revealing something. Juanishi his health is really an issue, and it's a real struggle for him to get around, and he has the good support. But I just wanted to put that out there up front and acknowledge that part of him. Juanishi, you're on, my man.
I'm on. Well, this poster was printed for the anniversary, like you said, and it's Madre Santa Tierra Sol. So it's celebrating many things. In the lower center, you see this young girl holding 2 ears of corn. And in the indigenous community of Central Mexico and the Nahuatl speaking people, she is called Xilonen. And Xilonen means young ears of corn, which in our time means she's celebrating her quinceañera. So she's coming about leaving behind her young girl, and now she's stepping into the world of a young woman, and this is the celebration of that fact. And above her is crystals in the form of a diamond. Those are used to cleanse anything and everything spiritual, natural, yourself. And the two figures of coming in from the left and the right are Chicano Hopi spirit maintainers. Their job, they have a task, and their job is to maintain the magnetic poles of the earth so that the earth spins and doesn't spin out of control. So they control the north and south axis of our planet. And on the lower left and right, you have 2 deers. And the deers are the sacred creatures that are guardians of our Earth Mother and guardians of those who reside upon her. So in a short thing, that's kind of what this poster means.
I wanted to say it's really a coincidence that you chose this subject of a young woman on her quinceañera for the show Quinceañero. I don't know if that was intentional or if it's just happenstance, if it's a coincidence that those two things came together.
I think it's a coincidence.
You think it's a coincidence? It also reminds me a lot of other work that you do that we will not see here, other prints that you've done. But if somebody who moves forward to take a look at your work, and your work is widely held by museums and other institutions and books, is your use of the period, pre-Columbian period, I'll use that. how much you have drawn from pre-Columbian times into your modern life and your modern settings. I find that that's interesting. You really filled yourself up in your life with knowledge of pre-Columbia Americas.
The reason I do that is I'm a Mexica Chicano in Otzlan. So my roots go way back into prehistory, and my family is from Mexico. So a lot of that culture was transferred onto me. And then in my research of the art of the Americas, I came across all these images and symbols that I have incorporated over the last 40, 50 years. So mostly my images are kind of pre-Columbian, but up to date and futuristic of our culture and our house.
Have you traveled in Mexico extensively? I know you've been there, but I don't know how extensive your travels have been.
When we were kids, my parents being farm workers, and in like from here this time of the year, November to February, the ranches after the harvest kind of closed down, so there's all this time on their hands. So what my parents do, they packed us in the station wagon, food and all this stuff, and we'd head south, and we'd go first. We would go to Zacatecas, where my father is from, and we spent a month in his village. That was like it was stepping back a century, because there were rural people. There was no modern conveniences. They went down to the river that circumvented the village to get their water, wash their clothes. The young children would go out, collect firewood, and the mother and the grandmother and the tias would be cooking in the kitchen on this comal, tortillas, making beans and whatever food was available for that day. And then after that, we would go to Jalisco, where my mother was from. She's from San Juan de los Lagos, which is more of an urban city, small urban city, more modern, had running lights, cars and streets and cafes and bars and cantinas and a church. And so every year for about 15 years, we would do that every year.
Let me ask, go ahead, finish.
Well, after we finished visiting with our family, then we took off and we go to Mexico City, and we go to the cathedral and the pyramids. So I got a real soaking of what Mexico was all about.
Yes. Tell me, now that you brought up Mexico, let me bring up the Southwest, because you're using Hopi images in this. What's your connection to the Hopi symbols, the Hopi people's symbols?
Well, Stan Padilla, on several trips that he and I would take into the Southwest, he introduced me into the Pueblo villages. We actually went into Pueblo villages. And unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to see the ceremonies, but I got to see what they use in the ceremonies. So when I saw the Kachinas and they explained what the Kachinas' duties were, it just burned into my mind. And so this was a golden opportunity to put that to use.
Okay, you want to move on to the next?
Yeah, let's go to.
Okay, next image. Oh, it's a close up. Well, just leave it on here for a second so people can just take in what you've said a little bit more closely. I don't want to go into detail on how things are made, but I must compliment you, because as we were preparing for this, I really was able to look at this piece more closely than I ever have. And the amount of color, like right here, we're looking at the crystals, the kind of detail that you got on silkscreen. And I'll say the same thing for elements of the young woman. And now we don't see the deer, but maybe you can go back to the deer if you would, Devora. Thank you. When you look at the deer here, if the viewer would just take a close look, that kind of work on that deer is, in my world, is impossible to achieve. In your world, you did it. You know how to do it, but the color, the subtlety of color is just wonderful. So I compliment you on that, Combs. Now we'll go up. Huh?
Run my colors red, yellow, blue, and red. And I do blends of those colors. So you can see in this band of color where she's standing, my blend is vertical. And then the band that goes across behind the crystals and the cachinas, it's a horizontal blend. So, and then on her, geez, there's just multiple layers and multiple layers. I think in all, I must have printed like 20 separations to get all these colors to lay down and sit the way they do. Very difficult printing. It took me about a month to complete this print.
Wow. Okay, there's my first wow. Let's move on to the next. There you go. One more canto, 1978. You want to start in?
Yeah, I'm still using the imagery of the pre-Columbian and modern Mexica, Chicano images. The male on top is celebrated because it's one more canto that the public comes together to sing and read their poetry. And on the bottom, you see this pre-Columbian figure. Well, in the pre-Columbian world, they had a ceremony also called Flor y Canto, poets, music, dance, and all that. So I use that to signify that this is timeless. This one night, this one more canto is a timeless thing that reaches backward in time and it springs forward in time. And the woman, she is, if you see her arm going into his ribs, well, I borrowed a little bit from the Bible where from Adam, the Creator took a rib from Adam and created the woman. Well, that's one version. But then in the center part of her, you see this looks like a child being born. Well, it's the new world, a new age, a new consciousness that's coming about. And so it's also very complex separations because I have all these different color separations and all the blends are going one way or another way. And just very complicated. Another method that I use about 15 stencils. And so in the edge of the printing of the color, that's where I put the names of all the poets because as you can see,
Let's get a close up. As you say that, let's get a closer view so people can see that. The names are all on the edges.
yes.
Go ahead.
On top here is Cleophas Vigil and Jose Montoya. Cleophas is one of the elders of poetry from New Mexico. And then around the edges of all the design, you see all the other artists that came. And as you were telling me, they came from all over the state and all over the Southwest. Maybe if you don't mind, you'd read some of those names.
I got to tell you that when I tried reading the names, I went around, I had a chance to look at the names. By the way, the very first name on the right is Louis the Foot. So it's one of the homeboys ended up there. But when I went around reading the names of the people who read that night, it's unheard of that this collection of incredible poets came together here in Sacramento. And I know that Jose was the MC that night, and he's the only one who could have managed that group. But I also noticed on the left side, the name of Juan Felipe Herrera was there that night. Just almost every poet of note is of note, published poets, and they became teachers of poetry. And as I say, one became the United States Poet Laureate. It's just an incredible evening. Went from 7 till 2 in the morning, 7 hours of poetry in a bar.
Mexican bar.
Incredible that we pulled it off.
It was a cantina, hardcore cantina.
There might have been only one fight. Just kidding.
There could have been more.
Anyway, so yeah, that was quite a night. Poesía y música. Do we have another one, another close-up? Yeah. Do you want to talk about either one of the close-ups?
Well, this one here is the woman, and she's a futuristic person, and the baby, and well, it's the baby or not, but it's a new son, new age that she's given birth to. And so for me, that was very important to signify that the women hold up half the sky. You know, we've always been criticized, the RCF, as being womenizers or excluding women from our mess, but
I might point out, drop the word or.
yeah.
It's usually and. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, the women.
I'm being funny when I shouldn't be.
Women did more than half of the work that we're credited for. If it wasn't for them, most of these things and events probably would never have happened.
Yeah, and that's why I showed that picture of the crowd, because it's just filled with women as well as men. So am I the person who I'm seeing upside down, the figure at the bottom of the poster, is being birthed?
No, he's from the past. He's from pre-Columbian times.
Okay.
He's officiating and assisting in the birth of the new son. So he's bringing his energy forth so that this cosmic event can take place and happen.
Well, for those people who don't know, the Reno Club was a very popular club because they had live music, they had dancing, but it was also a bar. And so in the neighborhood and beyond, some of us didn't live in that neighborhood, but we went to the Reno Club. The bar was just a regular neighborhood bar. And all of a sudden, here's 7 hours of poets reading while people are sitting there having their beer, with their wife, their buddy, and so it was a wonderful mixture that night, I think, of it was like a pop-up artistic event in this bar to the people who were sitting there. And the thing that blows my mind, compa, is that it was $1 for 7 hours of music and poets.
Yeah.
Anything else? Oh, is there anything else you want to say about this piece? Do you want to go back to an image, or should we move on?
You could move on.
And this is the 5th annual Operation Christmas Benefit.
Unity.
No date.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a good reason why there's no date.
Yeah, speak to that. Why is there no date?
Well, you see my colors selections on this are lighter than most of my other prints that I've done. This is very, very light, very almost transparent. And you can see in the center, in the God's eye, are the colors that I use, the yellow, red, and the blue. And when I printed this, it didn't have a date because I printed it about 2 or 3 days ahead of the event. So as we were printing this, we figured, why put the date? It's gonna happen right now. So that's why you don't see a date on this, the year, or you see it's on December 20th, but
Yeah.
other than that,
At the last, on part one, when Louis the Foot was talking about having no year printed on the no date, he said it just meant you now had to cut out and print something else on and that takes time. And on so many jobs like this, we didn't have the time. Either we were told to do it and do it within a matter of a week, a day. It just had to be done overnight. So that was Louis talking about why no date appeared.
pretty much this thing was printed within 2 or 3 days from the first pencil design layout, and then to cutting the stencils and then printing it. And you're right, it was an all-night session.
Well, the first two posters you talked about, the first one, you told me at some point, it took weeks to do it. The next one, the last one, you used the word month. It took a month to do one of the posters. So that explains a lot why it just takes time to make these. Let's talk about this one.
Well, this one, you see in the center, the two hands holding up that stalk of corn. And then above the stalk of corn is the God's eye on the huicholes. And those are in the center of the God's eye, the primary colors that I use. When in my separations and I mix my colors, I use extender to give more of a transparency effect. So that's why most of the image and most of the colors in the background are very light, because there's a large amount of transparency mixed into the color, something like 60-40 mix. It's come out lighter. And it almost looks like a neon painting.
And I would have said it looks like watercolor.
It has that kind of feel also.
Yeah, then so the extender makes the less, well, it makes it more liquidy, I said more watery, doesn't it? More, not watery, but you can see through it. Less opaque.
Makes it more transparent.
Okay.
So you put down the yellow and then you put the red on top of it, you get, because of the transparency, you get kind of an orange. And then you put the blue on top of that, you get a green. And this one, because it has such a short amount of time, I had to keep the blend very simple and just do it as fast as I can.
We got about 5 minutes left, compa. There's something perhaps people are interested in this. Let me ask you to speak to it. You're the imagery you use, pre-Columbian native imagery. It seems to me you use it in all your work. Would that be accurate?
Pretty much, yeah. It's a main feature of either my paintings, my prints, my low relief sculptures, or whatever I'm working on. I use that.
Would you say that would be true for most of the imagery that has come out from the RCAF, or do you think you're standalone of using native imagery?
I don't think I stand alone, but I think me and Stan Padilla probably use it more than all the other guys within the group.
And even your own name, Juanishi, the name Ishi, how did that get attached to your?
Oh man.
You don't remember?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, you do?
The group, everybody that comes into the group or has been in the group has a nickname. And one of the group members has to give you your nickname. And so when we were getting to know each other, I was telling him about my early days, yoga, mountain climbing, camping, and all that kind of stuff. And Richard was listening and he says, "You're kind of like that guy Ishi." I said, "No, I'm not." He says, "Yeah, you're kind of like that guy Ishi. He was the last of his tribe, and you're the first of your tribe." I says, "Don't do that to me." So he tagged me with the name Ishi, Juanishi. And for about 3 or 4 years, I just had a hard time accepting that name. And eventually it just became, yeah, I'm Juanishi, I'm Ishi.
Well, now there are people who say if they call you Juan Orosco, it just doesn't sound right.
Not
You're
very much.
Juanishi. Does your family call you Juanishi?
We're stuck, we're stuck in the past.
Ah, I know that you and I, being tocayos, both of us have Johnny attached to our lives somewhere in this life that we've led. So, yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I think we're just about out of time. We have one more image. I throw this in as a sort of a parting photograph for our presentation, compa. This is this I saw in Oak Park. I was driving by 2005, and all of a sudden I see this billboard, and I'm going, "What the hell is that?" Because we've never had a billboard promote our work, and I just had to jump out of the car, and I had to photograph this billboard. It was for a show, a group show at one of La Raza Galeria Posada's locations on R Street. And from a photo by Rudy Cuellar's dad, Rudy Sr., and taken, if you remember, at the television studios when Progreso had a show on it. And we went to talk about the exhibitions, one of our work as well. And so there we are, still there.
Crazy.
Juanita Polendo is in the picture, and the other is Sid. I'm blanking. Clara Sid, and Frank Godina on the bottom left, and then Tomas Ibarra Frausto, who worked for the Rockefeller Foundation, joined us. So that's it, folks. Juanishi and the good people of the library and those who chose to tune in. We hope that you learned something about us, our work, these pieces, and now you know that it wasn't announced that there is an exhibition of the RCAF here at the State Library. And we saw it today when we came in, and I really recommend you come to the State Library and you take a look at it on the second floor. We have how many more minutes?
Q&A.
Yes,
Thank
you.
Oh, no.
Yes, yeah, we're not leaving it. We're going to spend some time for questions that have come through the chat. So thank you, Juan and Juanishi, for that fascinating talk. And I know I'm not alone in that I could just listen to you both all night, share your stories and talk about your artwork. So thank you so much for spending this time with us. And I will turn it over to Jesse. Have there been any questions in the chat that we can ask our speakers? Thank you.
Absolutely. And I also want to say thank you to everyone for all of your lovely comments for our speakers in the chat as well. So I'll start with the first question. How does the collective nature of RCAF's work for social justice resonate today? Do you see the impact of your movement on current consciousness?
Well, I don't know am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a question I think we all grapple with at one time or another. What is the impact today of people who did something the other day, in this case, over the last 50 years? Is there an impact? I know there is, because I am forever affected by the work of the people around me, and the people who have departed. I am forever changed, and I hope it's changed for the better. I know that I've contributed. I know that I've entered into situations with a consciousness and an education, a learning, in which I was able to make a change in that immediate moment by standing up, speaking out, writing about. As a teacher, I have students who still are very complimentary about their experience in my classrooms. It's when you carry the spirit of a collective, and this is really important. I'm glad you used the word collective, whoever asked that question. It was the word I was trying to remember earlier in my presentation. I learned in the collective that we were a part of that there was no chairman, there was no president, there was no king, there was us. And in a collective, everyone has value, everyone has something to say, and everyone is allowed to speak. And movement comes by virtue of making your case to people, and slowly people begin to move in a direction. And it's the direction that the consensus says is the direction we should go, right or wrong. But it is the way it has worked. And while some of the artists have been designated as providing leadership, what you don't see are the number of people who stand up and provide leadership in over the 50 years. They developed it, they had a chance to use it. And so I think there's enough references to the work of the RCAF over the last 50 years by institutions and by people who had been elected officials, people who have been superintendents of schools, people who have been published writers. And anyway, it goes on, that yes, there's been an impact. And I just see it even in my own children. They are forever touched by growing up in this circle. And so they're a next generation and they're teaching their kids. And so, yeah, it goes on. Ishi, you want to answer that?
Well, I have similar feelings about that. I still have students coming to my apartment to want to learn from me how to do this, how to do that. You know, how should I, what kind of colors should I use? What kind of paint should I use? You know, all the little things. And so in that sense, in my world as a painter artist, yeah, the movement continues, it keeps growing. You know, it hasn't stopped. It doesn't stop with us as we fade away. But there's a younger generation, and then even younger generation. We both have grandchildren that are being raised within this system of belief and doing. And so that'll be passed on to our future generations, and whatever they do with it, well, that's their choice.
I know this isn't the program about muralism, but if anybody has ever walked in front of the great murals of Mexico that were created in the 1920s and 30s, it was made to educate the Mexican populace who did not have education. And so it's the history of Mexico and the history of the struggles and the peoples. And I went there in the 1960s and I was being educated and transformed, changed by having seen those. So the RCAF murals, the RCAF history, I know that this reason why we were talking and presenting the art, it's in the archives of the state of California. Someday somebody's going to look at this video in part one or come and do research, and they're going to be perhaps changed or affected by our work and the work of all Chicano artists who do this work. Next.
Thank you. Next question for both of you. What is one of your favorite artworks that you created, and are there any special ones you still have framed in your home?
Ishi.
The next piece I haven't done yet. To pick a favorite out of all the millions or thousands and thousands of thousands of artworks that I've created in these past 50 years, that'd be very difficult. I don't know if I could do that. So that's why I say the next one that I do, that's my favorite.
That's fun. You know what my quick answer jokingly was going to be? My last one. The most recent one is my favorite. Yours is your next one. So yeah, there certainly are favorites that as you go through, I have many more drawings than I have paintings or silk screens, but I often stop and pick up an old drawing book and I go through it and I say, oh, I really like that one. But there isn't one. I think there's a painting I like more than others, but anyway, so that's our answer.
Thank you. So next question, how did your involvement with students and community members inform your work and your thinking?
Well, I'll start, and that has to do because I was in the classroom and with my students, and on a day-to-day basis, I saw that it taught me that I had to consider them where they were in order to teach, in order for education to begin. I couldn't start from some, I'll put it in this way, some idea in the stratosphere and think that will attach itself. I had to find out who my students were. I had to get them to open up and talk. I had to get them to speak their mind, that they own what they say, that they would become more careful about what they say, or they would find the limits of what they know before you could move on and be educated. So it was something I learned that I said, the kind of teacher I want to be is one who gets to know their students and one who knows what they're thinking, one who then can take a step to adding to what they know.
Yeah, and then for me, I did 30 years of artist in residency and artists in the communities, not only with the California Arts Council grants, but also with Sacramento Metropolitan Arts Commission's arts and the community grants. So I taught in those after school classes for over 30 years throughout the northern part of the state. And in that I realized, as I was growing into this, becoming a teacher, that I had to do, my research had to be very good. I had to be very careful about what I would introduce into the class so that I could back it up. It wasn't something I just pulled out of my noggin. I did a lot of research. It taught me to do a lot of research, get my facts straight about what I was going to present to the students. And if they received it or not, well, that was a challenge.
Wonderful. So next question, can anyone be an artist, and how can we inspire people to create?
No, we're the only two who could be artists.
Yeah, my belief is anybody and everybody. I mean, anybody and everybody are an artist, is an artist. Maybe they just don't recognize it when they're daily moving around.
In some ways, it's a redefinition of artist. When I think of everybody can be an artist, because so many people have a narrow definition of artists. I learned that when I worked for the State Arts Council, traveled all over the state and then traveled around the country. people use the word artist to mean someone who paints, someone who is dealing in visual art. And yet we know that the artistry comes with every possible form. And then if you continue down that path, it's my brother is a carpenter, but he is an artist when it comes to making things with wood. Without even, he wouldn't think of himself calling himself an artist. Someone who cares what they look like and wears this with that and dresses themselves, has a sense of creativity. Somebody who takes their car and makes it into an incredible three-dimensional piece, a lowrider automobile, is an artist. You have a vision, you have thoughts, and you pull yourself a little further than what the norm might be, or where you were a minute ago. You're now somewhere else. So it's creativity that is really at the root here of artistry. And it's really too bad, because I think this has been RCAF struggle, as well as every artist and every art educator, everybody who deals with policy in the arts or education. It's, God, if we could only put more resources into creating a more creative society, we would just be a completely different people doing a completely different thing. So am I blabbing too much?
We do have time for one more question. Do you have any interesting memories of the One More Canto event?
Yeah, again. Could you repeat that question?
Sure. Do you have any interesting memories of the One More Canto event?
Interesting memories.
What do you remember from One More Canto?
What I remember most, well, several things I remember. I mean, not only the event was in a Mexicano cantina that was in Barrio, but most of the Bay Area artists that came into Sacramento that day, well, that day was in the summer, and it must have been about 100 degrees outside. So when they came in, they were just burned. They were drained, you know, they weren't used to this kind of heat. And everybody else thought the state was like, it's not too bad, it's only 100.
Well, that's my impression. You know, it was poetry in a neighborhood bar. It's like, huh? It worked. It worked.
That's great. Thank you, Jesse, for running the Q&A, and thank you again to both of you for sharing and spending time with us today.